Hi, everyone. It's great to be here as part of the Geotab Extend conference. I really appreciate you joining us today. I'm Jim Noble. I'm the Senior Vice President of Risk Engineering for eDriving, and I am delighted to be joined today by my colleague, Steph Campbell, eDriving's Director of Privacy and Compliance. Hey, Steph.
Hi, Jim. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Good to have you. In this session, we're going to be discussing the challenges associated with introducing or expanding driver risk management programs. And we're going to be looking at some key legislation that you should be aware of and talking through some of the best ways of overcoming the challenges. So let's take a look at today's agenda. First, we're going to discuss the reasons for implementing a driver safety program in the first place and the need to address privacy concerns as part of this. Next, we'll look at legislation, and because it's a global session, we'll look it will take a little bit of a whistle-stop tour around the legislation around the world. Then we'll look at the challenges associated with implementing a program before moving on to the advice for program approval and the onboarding process. Finally, Steph and I will host a little Q&A at the end. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have along the way, and we'll answer as many as we can live at the end of the session. So, Steph, what do you say we get started?
Okay, so let's address the need to even be discussing this today. First, what do I know? Well, at eDriving, I'm Director of Privacy and Compliance, which means that I'm responsible for ensuring that all our products are compliant with privacy and information security laws and regulations. And prior to joining eDriving, I was a regional risk manager for one of eDriving's large clients. In that role, amongst other things, I was responsible for implementing a safe driving program and a post-collision process in Europe. So aside from being your point of contact for all things privacy, I also have practical experience of the implementation process, including the approval process with work councils and unions. So before we dive in, let's remind ourselves of why organizations choose to manage driver risk in the first place.
Yeah, if we, and you've heard this many times, if we look at the numbers of traffic crashes, road deaths, particularly those associated with driving for work, it's very clear that this is an issue that can't be ignored. Generally, approximately 3.5 million people die each year as a result of traffic crashes, and we've gotten a visualization over the last year or so of how, when millions of people die or hundreds of thousands of people die, how that grabs the world's attention. But unfortunately, road traffic deaths isn't one of those. Road traffic injuries that are a leading cause of death for children and young adults, and really that's the case for ages 5 to 29 years old. This is the number one cause of death. 66% of unsafe drivers who were assessed by on-road evaluations self-rated themselves as good drivers, even though these numbers continue to go in the wrong direction. Research has suggested that distraction is present in 52% of normal driving, and that on average, a non-fatal injury crash can cost the employer over $70,000. So it's really clear why this is of interest to your business. It is a problem of epidemic proportions across the globe. So every business really needs to effectively manage driver safety.
So at the company level, it's not just a moral obligation to manage driver safety, it's a legal one too. I'll move into some of the key legislation soon, but first here's the general provision, regardless of where you are in the world. An employer has a duty or a responsibility to ensure the safety and health of workers in every aspect related to the work. Now, the hierarchy of controls are 1, elimination. Well, lots of us have been doing that in the last 12 months, but of course you can't eliminate all travel. Substitution, many fleets have adopted more safe choices of vehicles. And then third and fourth, engineering controls and administrative controls. These are the things that eDriving can help you with, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So it's not just a corporate safety issue. All around the world, regions and countries have adopted road safety strategies, which all target one thing, their commitment to reducing serious injuries and fatalities on the road. Here are just a few examples. The EU has adopted a Vision Zero approach to eliminate deaths and serious injuries on European roads. Now, the EU has set a 50% interim reduction target of deaths and serious injuries by 2030 and a goal of zero by 2050. Similarly, the US has a Road to Zero coalition. That coalition was launched in 2016 with a vision of zero deaths again by 2050. 650 professional associations, businesses and industry associations, safety groups, government agencies, and non-profit organisations have all signed that coalition. E-driving is actually one of those. Canada has its own road safety strategy, which is called Road Safety Strategy 2025. It's the fourth national road safety strategy, and it combines the long-term vision of making Canada's roads safest in the world and unite efforts to reach the vision of zero fatalities and serious injuries on the road. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Global Road Safety Partnership, of which e-driving is a proud member. They're a non-profit organisation formed in 1999 in response to the global recognition of road crashes and injuries as a human-made health crisis. The role of them is to create multi-sector partnerships, engage with frontline road safety interventions throughout the world, and provides road safety program coordination at a global level.
Well, thanks, Steph. Appreciate that. And some great information, especially around a lot of the initiatives that are happening across the globe. You know, there's really good, this is all good information behind introducing a program. And, you know, we're going to be talking about the typical process involved. What about addressing specific legislation within your own country or a country that you may be expanding into?
Yes, this is really critical. As one of the most important considerations for organisations is how to stay on the right side of the law. And it can be confusing to know whether you're doing that right. Here's a brief overview of the laws that apply around the world. Now, since the GDPR was introduced in 2018, many other countries have begun to review their own data protection and privacy laws. Many are largely aligned with the GDPR, but almost all have some variations, particularly with terminology. So, for example, the terms data controller and data processor are used for the GDPR, but not for others. Data subject access rights vary from one law to another. The variations make generic privacy notices very challenging. Our in-house privacy and compliance team monitor global privacy law changes that can happen very quickly. The most impressive of these is Virginia in the US. And that bill was recently passed only 2 months after its introduction. And in the last few months alone, consumer privacy bills have been introduced for approval in New York, Florida, Washington, D.C., Oklahoma, Minnesota, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Illinois. Now, the CPRA will replace the California Consumer Protection Act, the CCPA, and processing of personal data in an employment context will be subject to the CPRA in 2023. However, e-driving already complies with these requirements. As I've said on this slide, 2021 will probably see more new privacy laws introduced than in the last 10 years.
Wow, that's incredible. There's just so much activity going on around safety and privacy around the world. I'm glad we have you, Steph. So, and I'm glad this is your job and not mine. Let's discuss how some of these challenges, create challenges for our companies and what we can do about them.
Okay, so fact versus fiction. Across the world, safety laws consistently state that a vehicle is also considered a workplace, and all aspects of duties should be risk assessed, even if they're considered incidental to the job. Now, sales teams, mobile engineers, and other functions that require frequent travel often consider that their travel to and from the appointments is incidental because it isn't their main job.
Incidental, easy for you to say.
Yeah. Driving should never be considered incidental. It's probably the most dangerous activity that somebody will undertake at work, so it should never be considered as incidental. And moving on to privacy, again, fact versus fiction. Across the world, privacy laws consistently state that personal data should be transferred and processed as securely as possible, as you would expect. Processing personal data of employees is permitted, providing that the reason is justifiable, proportionate, and advance notice is provided to the employees or to the unions, works councils, however it may be set up in that particular regional country. Lawfulness, fairness and transparency are the core principles. So here we have some real life concerns. We can't undertake a risk assessment. We did recently have an example of a program that was on hold because of a concern around a risk assessment being completed in case it was seen to be too intrusive. But the in-house privacy team had made that call without the knowledge that a risk assessment is actually one of the core principles in the safety law of the country in question. They were not in communication with the country safety team. So by simply arranging for the two groups to meet with us, we were able to resolve the issue. There's also a general view of our privacy law is different. Yes, each privacy law is different, and some adjustments need to be made to the program in some regions. For example, in some regions, our digital driver risk management program, Mentor, is programmed to only reveal driver scores to their managers if they drop below a benchmark score. In others, all direct reports scores are shown on the dashboard to their manager. It depends on the organisation, their industry, and the journey profiles. Many, many more reasons, as you'll see on this slide.
Quite a few. There's more concerns around privacy than most other issues when it comes to rolling out a driver safety program.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, driver concerns, we have discovered that the word telematics in particular can sometimes trigger some privacy alarm bells, and we've learned that addressing concerns about such programs from the outset is usually the most effective way to allay any fears. In the same way that crisis management ensures you get your version of events out there first, the same applies here. So common privacy concerns include, is this a surveillance or a tracking tool? Is location, GPS data visible to anybody other than the driver? All of these questions should be addressed within the privacy notice. It's important to note, of course, that the objective of a driver safety program is to keep employees safe and ensure that they return home safely at the end of each day. The personal information obtained to do that is kept to a minimum and on a need-to-know basis, in the same way that HR information is treated. So it is widely known that telematics can be used as a tool to improve an organisation's supply chain and ultimately reduces their CO2 output, which is now a fundamental goal of many organisations. But what if a driver has a serious collision, or a driver is accused of bad driving, or a driver receives licence violations whilst driving for work? If an organisation had access to information that indicates a driver is at risk of a collision or displays poor driving behaviour, and they don't do anything about it because it may be that the information only drives the supply chain processes and activities, it may be that it's monitored and analysed by a function in isolation, and those signs of risky driving go unnoticed. It could be that an organisation's culture doesn't focus on safety as an imperative. If any of those things happen, that organisation is at risk of prosecution in the case of fatalities or serious injuries, not to mention the cost of an insurance claim and the damage to business reputation. It all comes back to the reason for implementing the programme in the first place. As I said at the beginning, there is a need to manage driver safety. There are legal obligations, moral obligations, continent-wide safety missions like Vision Zero, we mentioned earlier. Ultimately, it comes down to your organisation remembering that the purpose of implementing a driver risk management program is to reduce crashes that involve your employees who are driving for work purposes. At eDriving, we refer to a crash-free culture, and this is basically a company-wide focus on safety. It's not a program per se, it's a commitment to live and breathe safety. And you can successfully create such a culture within your organization.
Yeah, I'm really particularly interested, Steph, in the statistic at the bottom of the slide that says, on average, 20% of your drivers represent a much greater risk on the road than the majority. So this 20% will account for 80% of your crashes. Is that about, and I've heard this over and over again, but that sounds like it's about right to me.
Yeah, indeed. And that's why it's important to overcome those privacy concerns, to ensure that companies can identify the attitudes and behaviours that are making drivers high risk, and more importantly, do something about it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to me, and how telematics, how in-vehicle intelligence allows you to really identify that 20% before it happens, and the only way you find out about it is if they have a crash. So
Yeah.
At eDriving, we've been talking about the importance of crash-free culture for a lot of years now, and we've proven time and time again that a driver risk management program introduced without a solid safety culture will never be as effective as one introduced as part of a company-wide approach. So with this in mind, it's really difficult to get my head around how many obstacles there are during the process, especially when you throw privacy into the mix. So Steph, if you would, how do companies really gain that all-important approval of the program?
Yeah, you're right. When the need's been established, there are several stages that a company will go through. Now, from my experience, the initial requirement or the trigger comes usually from safety or fleet or the risk functions. And ordinarily, that's because of a concern due to either a serious incident or maybe an increase in the number of reportable injuries, or even due to an unexpected rise in insurance premiums. These people have a tough job. They have to sell the proposed changes internally, and in corporate environments particularly, that's a mammoth task. Each function or stakeholder has their own unique requirements and priorities. Launching a global or a regional program may require resources that they haven't planned for. And in large businesses, the perceived privacy challenges can mean an increased workload. Eventually, approval will be reached, and we'll move on to the implementation phase. But from my experience, despite a driver safety program being supported and approved by corporate or the board or whoever is ultimately responsible for the business, each location and region go through their own approval process. But privacy remains one of the last steps in the implementation process and is often the stumbling block.
Yeah, you usually say we need to turn that around and get it up front as opposed to waiting to the end.
Yes, absolutely. So common questions, I'm sure we've all seen similar. How can it help? How's the data stored? Is the data transferred to the US? Again, all of these concerns need to be addressed at the early stages.
Yeah, and these are all things that we work with on a regular basis. So with that, I really think, that's about all the time we have for today. Again, submit your questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to those as quickly as we possibly can. And I hope this has been valuable advice for everybody today. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll get to them as soon as we can. So with that, I'm going to say adieu. Steph, thank you very much for being on with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for those of you who have any questions, we'll get to them as quickly as we possibly can. Again, thanks for being here, and don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you need us.